Helen Frankenthaler was the first to develop the soaking staining technique. This is her monumental piece of 1952, Mountains and Sea. At age 23, she was recognized for this piece for a couple of reasons. First, it was huge, 7 by 10 foot, but also because it was the first to use the soaking staining technique where the paint became one with the canvas. Rather than using paint thickly, Helen laid her canvas on the floor and poured her paint right on top of the surface and let it soak in. They melded together, and Helen has said that the paint became the canvas became the painting. So that was a big difference from what other painters were doing in the 1950s. She also moved the paint around using mops. She would lift it up and let it puddle and pool. She'd let it soak and create these beautiful landscapes. Now, Helen's art was landscape-esque. It was big, but it also was a softer kind of palette as it soaked in. She began working with oil paints, but in the 1960s, she transferred to using acrylic paints. And she found that acrylics were much more stable in the canvas, were more luminescent and deeper, and also had a better life. They didn't degrade like an oil paint did. Hi everyone, this is Beverly Todd at Santa Fe Artist Getaway. Join me for a demonstration on how you can soak and stain and create a piece of art just like Helen Frankenthaler did. The two most important materials when you're doing soaking staining are water and canvas. Here's the lineup of materials that you will need. Raw canvas without any gesso, any size, and water. They're two most important things. You need something like a wetting agent to break the surface tension. You can use the golden wetting aid or a rinse aid like Cascade. Mix 2 to 3 to 4 drops into a cup of water. Your flow paints in tubs to mix your flow paints with a wetting agent. And then miscellaneous paint brushes, tools to move your paint around on the surface of your canvas. This is a small sample piece of raw cotton canvas. Now when it comes like this, it's sized, which means it has a little bit of a texture to it. And what happens when you put water on it? It beads up. It does not soak in. And because acrylic paint is mainly water, we need to take a step to make sure the paint can soak in and stain the canvas. So we're working with acrylic paint, and let me show you what happens with acrylic paint straight out of the bottle. Now, acrylic paint has a little bit of a surfactant in it already, which means it'll soak in slightly. So let's take a brush. And this is ultramarine blue straight out of the bottle onto the canvas. It soaks in slightly, but mostly sits on the top of the canvas. Now, if you would wet this with water, you would thin down the surfactant, which would mean it does not soak into the canvas as well as this sample right here. So what is a surfactant? A surfactant is something that breaks down the surface tension. And you can do that in a couple ways. Golden makes a wetting aid, and this is a 8-ounce fluid bottle for $14. It only takes about 4 drops of it in a cup of water, and I've already mixed this up. So this is plain water with 4 drops of the golden wetting aid. And this will break the surface tension and allow the paint to soak in. So what happens, and here's a tub that has some paint mixed up in it already. So now we have our blue paint with just a dab of the water with the golden wetting agent in it. Mix it up and put it on the canvas. It's soaking in really nice. That surfactant has just helped break the surface tension. This is a great product by Golden, but you can also make a recipe at home if you look under your kitchen sink and get your rinse aid. This is a Cascade product. This is $7, $14. Same kind of mixture. Take a cup of water and put in 2 or 3 drops. Okay, let's see what happens next. I'm gonna wet this canvas first with the golden wetting aid, and then we will try the rinse aid. We'll see if there's a difference between them. And here are the two waters already mixed up. This is the golden wetting agent, and we're going to soak the canvas really good with this wetting agent to break the surface tension. Okay, we're going to rinse the brush. And now this is the rinse aid in water. And let's see what happens with it. We're going to soak the canvas with the rinse aid. And this is a pretty heavy canvas. You can get a lighter canvas, but this one is quite thick, so it's soaking in really well. Let's get a clean brush here. Okay, so now the wetting agent is doing its work and it's soaking in, breaking the surface tension. This is just paint without anything mixed in it. And look at that on the golden wetting agent. And now onto the rinse aid. Now you can take paint and just put it on top of the wetting agent, but you can also mix the wetting agent into your paint. So now you have surface tension products that are in the paint as well as on top of the canvas. Let's see what a difference that makes. Wet on wet and wet on wet. Here's a piece of canvas with that same test that has dried, so you can give an idea of what the wetting agents over here on the side look like. Those little demos were a lot of fun, but Helen Frankenthaler used large pieces of canvas on the floor. Let's take it up a size and see what happens. I did this test a couple hours ago. I wet the canvas with the wetting agent and then put the acrylic paint that also had wetting agent on it. So you can see how it has flown and soaked in. And some of these little lines and rivers are where the canvas was dry. So try that technique. See what happens when you put it on wet or wetting agent with paint on top of a dry canvas. Helen built up her layers. So we're gonna play around with building up layers also. This is a big thick brush with the wetting agent in it, and we're just gonna wet the canvas again. And it's not totally dry yet, but we wanna see what it looks like when a second layer of paint goes on. So we're going with the ultramarine blue, and this is the blue mixed up with the golden wetting agent already. You can brush it on, you can pour it on, which Helen did a lot of, and then let it drip and run and pour. And Helen would move it around and manipulate where the paint was going. As Helen created this technique, she found that the soaking stain method of paint into canvas really created a rich color, a lot of light reflecting back, and a luminescence. And this type of painting gained the name of lyrical abstraction and color field painting. It was large fields of color on huge canvases. So the soaking, staining fields of color allows you to draw with color. And you can see that here as we're drawing the lines, and some of the canvas that is a little bit drier, the paint runs and stays in its line. And then the spots where it is wetter and the surfactant has broken down the barrier on the surface, it is soaked in. It's gorgeous. So I'm really big on testing, experimenting, exploring, see how the different mediums and canvas all work together. And I want to share with you some of my tests. So this swatch of canvas shows different techniques with flow medium, water, spray paint, and then paint on dry. And I used everything from ink to acrylic thin down with water to acrylic thin down with the wetting agent. So you can see there's a lot of variables. And those those little pink dots? Well, that's wet on wet. So get a test swatch, start playing around, figure out what works for you and what you like. Here's another test swatch that went back with wet on wet colors. I used some mark making tools to see what marks would look like into the wet paint. What do colors look like adjacent? How do they bleed? A lot of fun playing around. And here's one more test spot. This is a teal with a olive green together. Just gorgeous. Now, if you grew up in the 1960s and 70s, more than likely you had a tie-dye t-shirt. I did. In fact, I did spend a summer at camp tie-dyeing. So I got to thinking, this wet on wet technique lends itself really well to tie-dye. So here's a few of the things I've experimented with to see the results. This is black, red, and yellow tie-dyed. The green and teal tie-dyed. This is an accordion fold with a yellow and blue, and a black and yellow accordion fold. And really, you follow the exact same techniques as tie-dyeing. So here is a lightweight piece of canvas. I'm just gonna twist and knot, and then wrap it up really good with rubber bands, every which way. So now that it's tied up tight in a knot, I'm gonna drop it into the water with the golden acrylic wetting agent. So it's soaked really good. And then squeeze out the excess water. Now that the water's squeezed out, it's time to drop on the paint. This is paint without any wetting agent in it. And then we're gonna grab the blue with the wetting agent and drip that on too. So now we've got blue on blue. I'm gonna squeeze it good so it soaks in. And just let it set in this little tub until it dries. Let's unveil this little tie-dye knot. Rubber bands are coming off, and it looks like a party. How cool is this? So let this dry thoroughly, iron it out, and then what do you do with it? Well, if you have a small piece like this, you could collage it onto a larger canvas. You could tear it apart. You could weave it into things. There's a lot of cool things you can do with this technique. Now that you have the soak staining technique down, let's take a look at this big piece of art behind me. This is what the application looks like on a big scale, just like Helen did. There are wet on wet techniques. There is dry on wet. This is a thick application of paint, an oil pastel, and a gel pen. This would be a beautiful piece of art as it is, or a great background, a great start for something that becomes more. The hallmark of abstract expressionist art is great experimentation. There is no single one way to do things, but there's a lot of divergent paths that you can take off on when you're using mediums and materials and substrates. It's so much fun to play and explore and experiment. Technique is so specific to each artist, so I encourage you to go out, play, develop your technique, develop your unique visual voice. Here's a quote by Helen that I absolutely love. She says, "I have one rule, no rules. You are free to break out of them. The end." Thank you, Helen, for encouraging us to be brave, experimental, adventurous artists. So I have one rule, go create. The end.